There is a voicemail on my phone that I have never deleted. My father left it 3 weeks before he died. He didn't say much. His voice was thin by then, not the voice I grew up with. But at the end, before he hung up, he said 7 words that I have listened to more times than I can count. Elaine is not what she told me she was. That was it. No explanation. No follow-up call. No chance to ask him what he meant. 3 weeks later, he was gone. And Elaine, his wife of 9 years, the woman who had spent nearly a decade convincing my father that his own children didn't love him, was standing at the attorney's office in a black dress, with her lawyer beside her and a will in that folder that left us with nothing. My name is Damon Whitfield. My sister is Camille. And what we did over the next 14 months, while everyone assumed we had walked away and accepted it, is the reason Elaine Whitfield lost everything, including what was already hers. Stay with me, because this story moves fast and every single twist is real. Our father's name was Robert Whitfield. He was a contractor. Built his company from a single truck and a tool belt into a business with 40 employees and 3 commercial contracts that paid him well into his 60s. He was not a soft man, but he was a fair one. He met Elaine Cousins at a charity golf tournament when he was 61 and still sharp enough to read people. Or so we thought. Elaine was 54, polished, warm in a way that felt curated, like she'd studied warmth and practiced it in a mirror. She had 2 adult children of her own from a previous marriage. Tyler, 31, who had never held a job for longer than 18 months. And Brianna, 28, who called Elaine 3 times a day and referred to our father, almost immediately, as Dad. My sister Camille noticed it first. She moves too fast, Camille told me after the 3rd family dinner. She's already talking about the house like it's hers. I told Camille she was being unfair. I was wrong. Within a year, Elaine had moved in. Within 18 months they were married. The wedding was small. Our father seemed happy, genuinely happy, which made it harder to say what we were both starting to feel. The changes came slowly at first, the way they always do with someone who is doing this deliberately. Elaine began mentioning, in passing, things my father had apparently said about us. That Damon was only interested in the business, not in him. That Camille had been disrespectful at a dinner nobody else remembered the way she described it. That we visited out of obligation, not love. We heard about these conversations secondhand from our father, who brought them up carefully, apologetically, as if he wasn't sure whether to believe them but was starting to wonder. And then came the day he called me into his office. Sat me down across from his desk the way he used to when I was a teenager and something needed to be addressed. I've been thinking about the future, he said, about what's fair. Elaine has her children to think about too. I want to make sure everyone is taken care of. I asked him what he meant. He told me he was having the will reviewed. He said it carefully like a man who had rehearsed the words. I went home that night and called Camille. She didn't say I told you so. She just said, then we start documenting. Right now, tonight. If you've ever watched someone you love be slowly turned against you and felt completely powerless, hit that like button. Because Damon and Camille were powerless, but they were not passive. And what they did next is the reason this story ends the way it does. Subscribe to Karma's List and turn on the bell. We are 8 minutes deep in a story that is only getting started. Camille was an administrative assistant for a law firm, not an attorney, but close enough to attorneys, long enough to know exactly what documentation looks like and exactly what it can do. The night after my father told me about the will review, Camille started a folder, not on her phone, not in the cloud, a physical manila folder, kept in a locked filing cabinet in her spare bedroom. Inside it dates, every visit where Elaine made a comment that reframed one of us negatively. Every time our father repeated something back to us that sounded like Elaine's words coming out of his mouth. Every family event where Tyler or Brianna were positioned front and center while we were edged to the periphery of our own father's life. We also started calling our father more, not to check on the will, not to argue about Elaine, just to talk, to be present in a way that created its own record. And our father, despite everything Elaine had been pouring into his ear, always picked up. Here is the first twist. 6 months into our documentation, Camille got a call from a woman named Dorothea. Dorothea was 73 years old, a retired schoolteacher, and had been Elaine's neighbor in her previous life before the golf tournament, before our father, before all of it. Dorothea had seen a social media post Camille made on our father's birthday. and she called because she recognized Elaine in the family photo. What Dorothea told Camille took 45 minutes. Elaine had done this before. Not identically, but close enough. A widower in his late 60s. A relationship that moved quickly. A quiet shift in the man's behavior toward his own family. A will that was updated. That man had died. His children had contested. They had lost, but only barely, and only because they hadn't documented anything in time. Dorothea had watched it happen from next door, and when she saw Camille's post, she picked up the phone. We added Dorothea's account to the folder. Signed, dated, witnessed. The will was changed 8 months after that conversation. Our father called to tell us himself, which I believe to this day was his way of making sure we heard it from him and not from Elaine. The business, the house, the investment accounts, split 60% to Elaine, 20% to Tyler and Brianna, and the remaining 20% divided between Camille and me. From what had been 50-50 between us, our father sounded tired on that call. Not cruel, not convinced. Tired, like a man who had been worn down by something he couldn't name and had finally stopped fighting it. I asked him one question. Dad, is this what you want? Not what's fair, what you want. He was quiet for a long time. Then he said, I just want everyone to be all right. That was not an answer, and we both knew it. Share this right now, because we hadn't even found the recordings yet. And what was on them is what broke this entire case open. Our father's health declined over the following 2 years. Slowly, then the way it always goes. Suddenly, Elaine managed his care with an efficiency that looked, from the outside, like devotion. She hired nurses, managed his medications, controlled who visited and for how long. Camille and I were never turned away, but we were always managed. Visits scheduled in advance, never spontaneous. Never alone with him for long before Elaine or Brianna appeared in the doorway. In his last year, our father started sending us things in the mail, small things at first. A photograph of the 3 of us from a fishing trip 20 years ago. A copy of his first commercial contract, the one that started everything, with his handwriting in the margins. A birthday card for Camille with a note inside that said only, you were always the sharp one. Don't let anyone tell you different. We didn't understand what he was doing, until after he was gone. He passed on a Friday in November. Elaine called us. To her credit, she called us herself. The funeral was handled quickly. The attorney's meeting was scheduled for 10 days later, and 3 days before that meeting, a FedEx envelope arrived at Camille's apartment. No return address, inside a USB drive, and a handwritten note in our father's handwriting that said, I should have been braver. I'm sorry. Play this when you need it most. We sat at Camille's kitchen table and plugged in that drive. There were 11 audio files, recorded over the last 14 months of his life. Our father's voice quiet, deliberate, sometimes interrupted by coughing, documenting conversations. Elaine asking him repeatedly to add Tyler's name to the business accounts. Elaine suggesting, gently and then less gently, that Camille had spoken to an attorney about contesting the will, which was not true. Elaine telling him, 3 weeks before a family dinner, that Damon had called her privately to say he thought their father was losing his mind. I never made that call. And then the 11th file, recorded 6 weeks before he died. Our father's voice, clearer than the others, like he'd been saving energy for this one. My name is Robert Allen Whitfield. Today is the 14th. I am recording this because I am not sure I have the time left to say it in person. I changed my will under circumstances I now believe were not honest. I was told things about my children that I did not verify. I believed them because I was tired and because I loved a woman I trusted. I do not believe those things anymore. My children, Damon and Camille, have never been anything but loyal to me. I was the one who failed them, not the other way around. I want the record to show in my own voice that I did not change that will freely. I changed it because I was afraid of losing something. And in doing so, I lost the only things that were never replaceable. Damon, Camille, I see you. I have always seen you. Don't let her win. We sat at that kitchen table for a long time. Then Camille closed the laptop, picked up her phone, and called the attorney she'd been quietly consulting for 7 months. Don't go anywhere, because what happened in that courtroom is something Elaine Whitfield did not see coming. And neither honestly did we. The attorney's meeting lasted 11 minutes. Long enough for the revised will to be presented. long enough for Elaine's lawyer to outline the distribution, long enough for Camille to place a manila folder on the table and say quietly, "We'll be contesting." Elaine smiled, the kind of smile that has already counted its money. She had no idea about Dorothea. She had no idea about the 14 months of documentation. She had no idea about the USB drive. And she had absolutely no idea that the Attorney General's office in the state where her previous relationship had ended had an open file. That was the piece we hadn't expected. When our attorney began pulling records on Elaine's background at Dorothea's suggestion, following the account of the previous widower, he found something. The man's children had filed a complaint. It had never gone anywhere because they didn't have enough. We had enough. The case went to probate court for months later. Elaine's legal team was confident. They had a signed will, a notarized amendment, and 9 years of marriage to point to. What they didn't have was an answer for the recordings. Our father's voice, 11 files, 14 months, specific dates and specific conversations describing, in his own words, the pressure he had been placed under. Describing statements made to him that were verifiably false. Describing a pattern of isolation that the court recognized immediately. Dorothea testified, calm, precise, 73 years old, and utterly unshakable. She described what she had witnessed from next door in the previous relationship. She described the pattern. She named dates. The judge took 3 days to deliberate. The original will, the one drawn up before Elaine, leaving everything equally to Camille and me, was upheld. The amended will was ruled the product of undue influence and fraudulent misrepresentation. But here is the part that stopped the room. Because Elaine's conduct had risen to the level of fraud, provable, documented, corroborated, the court applied a legal doctrine that most people have never heard of. The Slayer Rule, adapted in civil fraud cases in several states to cover those who obtain inheritance through deliberate deception. Elaine didn't just lose the contested portion of the will, she lost her own spousal share. Every cent she would have been entitled to as his legal wife, gone. Tyler and Brianna received nothing. The house, the business, the accounts, everything our father had built over 40 years came back to Camille and me, exactly as he had always intended. I stood outside that courthouse and thought about the voicemail. Elaine is not what she told me she was. He knew to the end he knew. And he did the only thing he had the strength left to do. He recorded the truth. He mailed us a USB drive with no return address. And he trusted us to finish it. We did, Dad. We kept your receipts. Drop LOCKET below and tell me, did Elaine deserve to lose everything including what was already hers? Or was the court too far? And I want to hear from you. Have you ever watched someone manipulate a person you love and felt completely powerless to stop it? Tell me in the comments. Because you are not alone. Like this video. If Dorothea picking up that phone gave you chills, share it with someone who needs to know that documentation is the most powerful weapon a quiet person has. Subscribe to Karma's List and turn on that bell because next week we have a story about a grandmother who discovered her son had been draining her pension account for 11 years. And what she did with a notary, a locked box, and one very loyal neighbor was completely legal. And completely devastating. We keep receipts. Every single day.